Welcome. Today we are looking at the nature-nurture issue. This is one of those issues that we look at in the very beginning of lifespan development because it helps us to understand how we become who we are. Unless you have had your head under a rock somewhere, you have probably seen one of those commercials for DNA testing so that you can know where you have come from, where your ancestors came from. Interestingly enough, I saw a commercial recently that a woman was saying, "Oh, my great-great-grandfather was a such and such. That must be where I get my passion for whatever it was." And I turned to my daughter and I said, well, if she did not ever know her great-great-grandfather, it's highly unlikely she caught his passion for something. His passion. That's nurture. It's not genetic. A passion for something is not a genetic code. And so you're likely to catch a passion for something from someone that modeled it for you, that loved it for you. Now, talent, that's different, but a passion for something, not necessarily so. So what determines who you are? Is it your genes or is it your nurture? Or is it a little bit of both? Well, today we're going to look at some ingredients here to see, what kind of outcome do we get with the same ingredients? What kind of outcomes can we look at? We want to look at today at some developmental principles. And the first one is the concept of developmental constraints. There is a range of possible outcomes that is constrained, if you will, by the nature of the ingredients themselves. And so by its very nature, oil and butter and sugar and eggs and salt and yeast, these ingredients that we have before us can make a certain combination of things, if you will. And there's a certain amount of developmental actions that'll happen between them. So to say flour and cocoa will not make vanilla pudding. There are some certain outcomes that you're going to get because of them. Don't y'all love my little Pillsbury Doughboy? I just love him. He's lived with me in many houses, although I wish he would do more of the cooking. And so the ingredients themselves are going to dictate some of the outcomes that we have. Our second developmental principle is that neither flour nor your genes, and by that I mean genes, your genes, flour nor genes code your developmental outcomes. There's more to it than that. So you're not one way or another just because of a gene. The developmental outcome is a very complex transaction. So it involves your genes and other ingredients, if you will, nurture, and the nature of the developmental process. So if we're actually cooking, that means that the outcome is a combination of the flour, the genes, the other ingredients that are put with it, and the cooking process. And so if we're standing here in my kitchen, we have a number of different cooking processes. We can take these ingredients and we can use the waffle iron, which I don't use often, but yum yum when you do use it. You can use these ingredients to make some awesome waffles. We can use these ingredients to make a homemade bread, which is quite delicious. We can use these ingredients to make little cakes, if you will, for Valentine's Day. We can put these ingredients in this mixing bowl, and we can make, and then scoop out those delicious contents of sugar and egg and chocolate into scoops and on a pan and put it here in the oven. And if we do that, we have a different outcome. So this outcome is more complex. It takes all of these parts, and then it is contingent on the process that we use for an outcome. So when we alter the environment that a human being lives in, that yields very different outcomes, even with the same ingredients. So if you took two identical children, so even identical twins, if you see that genetically they're the same, but if they are put through different experiences growing up and they become they're different, they're not going to be exactly the same. They're going to be different depending on their circumstances. If you take one set of genes and you put it through different processes, you are going to have a different outcome. So what we also know is the further you get along in the process, in the cooking process, the more that the food item, the organism, if you will, achieves greater form. And the more form it takes, the less it looks like its original ingredients. It becomes more like what you want to look like at the end. In other words, if you are making chocolate chip cookies, and what are you going to put in there? You have flour, you have egg, you have a wee bit of salt, you have all these individual ingredients. And the more you mix them together, the less they look like their individual components. And then when you put them all out on that cookie sheet and you bake them, in the end, it doesn't look like its original form at all, those individual components. It looks more like what you wanted it to look like on the end, the developmental outcome. Principle number 4 is that a developmental outcome cannot be partitioned into heritable, inherited, or environmental components. So when you look at bread, you cannot quantify to which degree the bread is flour as opposed to the baking environment. It's all together there to make it bread. You can't separate it out. When you reach that end point, that outcome, you can't easily identify the constituent elements. So you don't look at an individual brownie or an individual cookie and see all of the things that happened to make it such. Now, if we look at all these ingredients that are here on the table, we know that with the same ingredients, we can make chocolate. Yum. We can make chocolate chip cookies. Here in Louisiana, we can make king cake. That is just some kind of good right there with sugar poured on top. We can make tortillas and we can make bread. The only difference is the way that these ingredients are put together and the process by which we cook them, whether it's in the oven or it's in a waffle iron, or we bake it this way, or we put it on another. I don't normally make tortillas, but I think you make those in a pan on the stovetop, can't you? Pour them. Do you know? My camera does not know. And so when we make items in our kitchen, the end result being this, We don't always sit around and think, I wonder how it came to be what it is. But human beings are like that. How did you become you? What was your genetic code? What is your genetic code? But what is the environment? What's baking you, if you will? What's cooked you up to be just the way you are today? If we take somebody who's wired, if you will, who has been known by God since conception. You know, the scripture tells us, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. I knew you. That's intimate relational knowledge. God knows who you are. He wired you to be not just your height or your with your hair color, but He wired you with a temperament, with a certain skill set, a capacity to do certain things. He's gifted you in certain ways. He's known you since the foundation of the earth. And so when you were born, you were placed into a family. You were placed with people who cared for you, hopefully cared for you well. But when our children are growing up and they experience things, that's life. That's the baking process, if you will. It's the cooking process. It's life. And so how we respond to our children, to our teenagers, even into our adulthood, the environmental press that happens against us has a great effect on the developmental outcome. So this semester, as we are reviewing all of these life stages, let's remember that all of these things are ingredients. Our genes, our environment, all of this helps to code who we are, but it doesn't dictate the developmental outcome. Much of the outcome is not nature. It's not your genes. It's your nurture. It is who has cared for you. How have you been encouraged? How are you motivated or not motivated? Have you been discouraged? Have you been promoted or have you been restrained? Have you been given opportunities or have you been deprived? All of those things make us who we are. And this semester, even as you're writing your developmental biography, remember to include such things. This is how they are genetically, but these are the kinds of experiences that this individual is having that is helping to form them into the person that they are. Enjoy.